everybody, and welcome to Epic Every Day, our podcast for busy, overwhelmed Christians who are trying to get out of busy, overwhelm, and moving towards freedom and abundance and peace.
Moving into the Slipstream.
Exactly. I'm Liz Frerichs, and this is my husband, Evan.
Good morning.
And we are so glad that you guys are here with us on this Tuesday. As you guys know, we work our way through the CSCs. They're an adaptation of Peter Ralston's Tai Chi principles. And they are being calm, surrendered, centered, connected, and complete. And this whole week we are talking about being centered, which is, living out of the essence of who God designed you to be. So yesterday we talked about being fragmented, kind of, picking either your mind or your heart. And today we are going to talk about family or peer or societal pressure.
Yeah, external forces. Yesterday was all about the inner struggle, and this is the outer struggle.
We're talking about it today because usually on Tuesdays we talk about surrender, and we're talking about being surrendered to external forces here. It's not necessarily a good kind of surrender, but, being stuck in that you're doing what somebody else wants you to be doing.
Yeah, although in the right relationship, the relationship with God, it's the right thing. That external force is where we want to go. But yeah, when it's, and it's the danger is it's fairly invisible, especially our cultural influences and our family influences, because that's our normal.
Yes.
And it's hard to see when those things need to change. I mean, it takes outside perspective, like maybe you went to college and started to see the world a little differently, or some other context besides just whatever your normal is.
Yes.
It takes a little perspective.
Yeah, I love Andrea Pennington has this TED Talk about becoming becoming someone to please our families. And she was talking about how they need to become who we are instead, and how when she was a kid, she loved doing the stage. That was one of the things that she loved getting to do. But her family was like, that's a nice hobby. You should get a job that pays decently. So she actually became a doctor, and she hated it. And so she was talking about how she realized as she was treating these different patients that they were doing what their family expectations were.
Yeah.
One of the other expectations her family had put on her was that children are seen and not heard. And so that was like completely contrary to being on stage.
Yeah.
And so she gave up all that because of who she thought her parents wanted her to be. But it's not like her parents were like, you should definitely do this. Her parents were telling her those things to try to help her,
Sure.
You need a good job.
Yeah.
Because you need to survive. It's not like they were trying to be difficult, but it was just so interesting. One of her exercises was go back to when you were younger. What did you want out of life? What were you passionate about? Carol Tuttle talks about that too, how especially if you have a certain personality type, like if your personality type was different from your parents', they may have inadvertently kind of squashed that. And so being able to recognize, wait, who am I supposed to be? Is so important.
Yeah. And even if you're not experiencing something quite, I think distinguishing ourselves from our family of origin it's a struggle. And it's an important struggle to, becoming an individual. But even if you're going to go into the family business or that's not very stressful, moving in the CSCs like we're recommending is still going to be different, probably, I would imagine.
Right.
And it's going to be a different rhythm of life. It's going to be, the people around you may not understand it.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things I love about Tai Chi. It's an internal art form. So the things that you are doing on the outside are like a tenth of the picture.
Yeah.
So people can look at it and go, oh, I see what you're doing. But 90% of what you're doing is stuff that they can't see. And the CSCs work the same way. 90% of it is about mindset and, your relationship with the Lord, how you handle different situations. it's all this foundational internal stuff. Nobody's going to know if you're doing it or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it comes, yeah, Jesus's teachings are like that too, when he's condemning the Pharisees for the way that they tithe.
Right.
Even though they tithe perfectly down
Yes.
to the last leaf of herb or whatever,
Yeah.
he said, you're not doing it right. There's an internal invisible thing that's your connection with me, your surrender to me, your love for me.
Right.
That is totally missing. So when we're examining our own lives, that's the kind of thing we want to pray for our eyes to be open about. Like, am I doing this because it just, because I don't really have a reason? It's
Right.
just programmed into my brain that this is right, and it might be right.
Yeah.
But you want to do it because of a right reason, not just because this is what I've always done.
Right.
And so, yeah, growing up and changing and being intentional and examining some of these things and maybe deciding to do something different is going to be stressful. And you're going to feel that pressure. Even if nobody around you is putting that pressure on you, like breaking away from whatever the normal is going to feel like there's external pressure.
Right.
You may feel judged, and you may not actually be judged, and you might be judged. But
Right. Well, and sometimes the hardest judgment is the things that aren't said.
yeah.
And so dealing with that, you just have to kind of be like, if you're centered, it gives you that balance to be able to handle whatever kind of judgment comes up. And to be able to still say, well, I'm doing this because this is who God's called me to be. I'm doing this very intentionally. So, yeah, I'm sorry you don't like it, but live with it,
And one way to be surrendered in centeredness is to ask lots of questions and maybe annoy some of the people in authority in your life, because there are answers to the why. And so maybe as much as we as a culture, Christian culture, try to explain to our children what's going on, there's just some things they're not going to understand until they're in their 20s and 30s, and like there needs to be dialogue. And so maybe doing something that's different than what your Sunday school thinks you ought to do, there can still be a conversation there that can be really productive.
Yeah.
And not everybody's life is going to be the same.
Right. Yeah, I was actually just tapping on that earlier, that conflict is an opportunity to grow your relationship, that it actually makes relationships better rather than that it makes the relationship worse.
Yeah, as long as it stays in the relationship and everybody's interested in keeping the relationship going and mutual growth and respect and things like that. An example in my mind is I've got two friends who, and I don't want to get into a theological debate, but this is just a good example, I think, of how the conversation can go and how, thinking a little differently and wondering if you agree with what you always thought or not, how that's beneficial. But two different friends, they don't even know each other, but they each have these views on child baptism.
Yeah.
And when the topic comes up, it's always very stimulating and it's fun. And then, if there's, in one case, it was just like our family and his family talking about it, and it was really interesting. And then with the other person, it was more in the context of our church and, some of the leadership of our church and having a conversation about it. And it was very interesting to see some people like immediately like, no, baptism's for consenting adults only.
Yeah.
And then some people, you could see the wheels turning and thinking about it, and it's a productive conversation.
Yeah.
Especially when it involves getting into the Word of God and praying for understanding.
Right.
And being open-minded to, okay, I've always thought this, but I want to make sure that what I always thought is what I still want to keep thinking.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you want to hold that stuff with an open hand. Something else that I think, just makes it hard to actually to step away from your family and peer pressure. One way you can tell is because it's outside of your comfort zone. Whatever you've been programmed, because we're all programmed, brainwashed, however you want to call it. Like,
Our brains are designed to that's how we learn. I mean, you wouldn't be able to
Right.
learn to talk if you didn't get brainwashed into your language or
Exactly.
your
Exactly.
origin.
It's not a bad kind of brainwashing,
Yeah.
but just the idea that we all, because of the things that we've been exposed to, both in our culture and our family of origin, and then in our peer groups, we have certain belief systems that we may or may not, recognize. But if you do something that's a little outside of your comfort zone, that's a good way to be like, where is this at?
Yeah. And so would that be like a personal challenge to find things like that?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about going back to, I think it was last week when we were talking about how God always calls us out of our comfort zones,
Yeah.
and how part of being centered is doing the things that God's called us to do. So that's going to involve going out of our comfort zone. Kind of like Abraham being called to leave his father's household, his culture, his gods.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he picked up and moved. And I think too often, like we were talking about yesterday, we're so focused on what's the safe thing to do and kind of staying within the confines of this is who I see myself right now, not being able to step out of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think the problem with the safe thing to do is that's probably tainted with the normal thing to do, which is just what
Yes.
everybody else around you is doing. Maybe it's not really safe at all, like on
Yeah.
its own, like in an absolute sense, but it's safe because you don't stick up like a sore thumb or you
Right.
don't get whacked for being different.
Yeah, definitely. That was actually something I was thinking about, with our little thing yesterday talking about the Las Vegas shooting. I have been thinking a lot about that since it happened, and just how, first of all, how important the CSCs are. Like, if we as Christians are not living lives that are abundant and full of freedom and, that, I don't even know what it is, that kind of raw, adventure-y, epic quality.
Mm-hmm.
We're not winsome to the world, and we're not doing the things that God's called us to do. And maybe some of those things are crazy things, like becoming friends with somebody who could be the next shooter person, and being a person that, is a fork in the road for them and helps them grow and change.
Right. And maybe the person that's not easy to have a relationship with or the weirdo, but I mean, I don't know. Not that all these people that do these shootings are the same, but I think there's some trends there where they're maybe isolated from their, who knows? But
right, and building relationships with people is such a great way to grow yourself, and then, to help other people grow too. So
yeah, I think you're right on. Like the answer is inside. I think I have a tweet posted on it's pinned on the top of my Twitter, I think, and I forget who the quote is. It might be Henry Nouwen, but it's about the thing that kills is not the bullet ultimately, but the hate in the shooter's heart, or something like that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that is only solved through the CSC, through community, through relationship with God, through loving a loving family around you.
right, exactly. Whether that's family, like blood family, or family that you build.
Yeah. So I think the sum up of this is that when we're going to feel this outside pressure. I think if you don't, that means you're
So involved in it, you don't even realize it's there.
You're so enmeshed in your normal cultural state, whatever that may be, that it's almost guaranteed that that's not the completely biblical way to live your life. I mean, Jesus' ministry was all about shaking up the religious establishment and getting back to the true Word of God and His teachings. The Sermon on the Mount and stuff. And in Western Christianity, there's lots of room to get back to the basics as well.
Right.
And that's totally what we advocate.
Yep. So thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for all the people that have been sharing. We really appreciate it. If you found this helpful, please do share it with your friends. And like Andrea Pennington says, be who you are. become who you are supposed to be.
That's right. God made you. He didn't make you just like your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad, and that's for a reason. So you can be
Exactly.
yourself even if you're not just like your neighbors.
Yes. We love you guys and we are praying for you. If you want to get a hold of us, as always, you can join our Facebook community, comment on the posts of each episode and we'll respond to those, or check us out on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening. Talk to you later.
Bye.